Hello and welcome to My Ears Hurt, the podcast that explores the world of experimentation in music. I'm Daniel Marks.
And I'm Nathan Rubin.
And on this week's episode, we're going to be continuing to introduce you to our personal music tastes, as well as pinpointing the moment in bands' careers where they move from mundanity to the realm of experimentation. So, how have you been?
I've been alright, thank you. What about yourself?
Yes, I've been alright. You've been listening to anything particularly interesting recently?
Well, I guess I'll talk about something that's very interesting in my eyes.
Okay.
October the 7th, let's say.
Yeah, okay.
Is the date I'm waiting for.
Okay.
And I'm pretty much sitting in my room waiting for that date to come. Because on that date will be the release of Meshuggah's eighth album, The Violent Sleep of Reason.
Right. It's on my list.
It should be at the top of your list.
It's not on the top of my list.
Definitely. It's on every list that I have.
I mean, to be fair, like, my list is in chronological order, so...
Right.
Yeah. Why are you looking forward to this album so much?
Well, they... Meshuggah release... Well, I have... Basically, in the last sort of like 5 or 6 albums have come out every 4 years. So, you know, there's a bit of time in between them to sort of process and think about what's coming next. But from the little snippets and teasers we have heard, you know... let's just say it sounded good. And, you know, Meshuggah are my absolute all-time favourite band, you know. I'm sure I've talked about them before, and I will always talk about them again. And, yeah, it's slightly different, this one, so I guess... Do you want me to take off, or...?
Yeah.
So, the first thing I'd like to mention is the album title. Now, just let this sink in. The Violent Sleep of Reason.
Now, can we just talk about this for a second? Because I always find metal albums have titles that are kind of flowery and languid and kind of difficult to decode. Do you have any sort of idea of what Violent Sleep of Reason might be?
Yeah, we do know what it's about now.
Okay.
There's been lots of interviews with the drummer, Thomas Hark, who works or who helps, you know, give out the ideas to the album design and helps with most of the lyrics and writes them himself. So he's done a few interviews. Because most of Meshuggah's albums are sort of named sort of by one word, and they have been mostly that. So this is their longest album title. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it's actually quite a big thing to sort of have that in my eyes, because it's very different for them.
Yeah.
And The Violent Sleep of Reason is based off of a drawing by an artist called Goya, I believe. And it's about a guy who appears to be sleeping and dreaming, and whilst he is dreaming, come all these, they're represented through bats and owls, all these sort of awful ideas and nightmarish entities that are coming towards him in his sleep.
Right.
So Thomas said that they based, you know, the album artwork and the album themes off the way sort of humanity is going in one way, you know, ignoring sort of all the threats in the modern world and, you know, the monstrosities that are going on, and all sort of the bad things, and about how most people just let them happen and choose to ignore them. So, you know, the violent sleep of reason, he said, you know, the implications of not doing anything.
Right.
And that's quite apparent in the artwork, where it's some person being held back by vines and snakes and metal and Meshuggah stuff.
I mean, I guess we'll talk about this in a bit more depth in a minute, but the song that you picked out for today is from the new record, right?
Yes, well, they... I mean, I was going crazy because, you know, you can't really hear anything about it, or, you know, in interviews they had various background music, but a week or so ago, maybe it's a bit more than a week now, they actually released, you know, a song number two in the album, you know, full 4.5 minutes of it they released. And, you know, I was very, very glad. It was relief, actually, for me hearing that, you know what I mean? Confirming that Meshuggah still sound like Meshuggah.
See, actually, I was kind of puzzled about that, because I mean, I guess we'll talk about it in a bit more depth once we've listened to it. But when listening to the song, it doesn't necessarily to me sound like typical Meshuggah.
Well, I'll get onto that and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Yes, I'll definitely talk about that.
In that case, shall we give the track a listen?
Yeah, let's definitely listen to it.
So it's called "Born in Dissonance," and you said it's the second track off the new record, which is called
The Violent
Sleep of Reason. Yeah. Okay. So here it is. So that was Born in Dissonance. I guess, Nathan, would you like to sort of summarize that a little bit?
I mean, there's too much to summarize. I mean, just listen. I mean, I couldn't describe my emotions listening to it for the first time. Like I said, it was just such a relief and such. It's weird hearing, having my sort of image of Meshuggah to be these 7 albums that I'd been listening to for sort of like 2 years, and then to hear something new from them, it was kind of unreal. Like, it sounded like them. It was what I knew, but it was weird just hearing something different from them.
Yeah, it's always interesting, like with bands, when you get into them after they've got like what you think is their whole discography.
Exactly.
And then they put out more. And that's always really disconcerting, because there's that fear that they're not going to sound the way that you wanted them to, or the way that you got used to, and you'd never been through that experience of them releasing new music. Is always a little jarring.
Yeah, it was, but definitely in a good way. So you said that it didn't sound like typical Meshuggah.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on that. Why do you say that?
I don't know. I felt that it was a little too clean. It was kind of mechanical for a Meshuggah.
This wasn't my first point, but I can't believe you raised that, because that's really interesting, because their last few albums, they have recorded, each instrument one by one, digitalized very much on the computer.
Yeah.
And this one, it's recorded live. That is a live take you're hearing.
That's bizarre. That's really odd.
Yeah.
Because I found that with at least with Meshuggah's older work, it's always seemed quite hellish and
no, it was. It completely was, and it was
grimy. But this
it was meant to be like that.
This, I don't know. Everything, I felt that it came through a lot clearer, and there was a lot less sort of stuff to get my head around.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I did really like, obviously, the polyrhythmic stuff. Meshuggah are the best at that in that kind of field. But it was a lot clearer where the sort of the divides were between sort of different polyrhythms, which I was surprised about. I thought it would take me a lot longer to figure out where the changes were.
Well, I'm going to mention that as well.
Okay.
Yes, because this song is not strictly polyrhythmic, and there are many misconceptions on polyrhythms in the sort of gent metal community, and most people, I would have called it a polyrhythm, but it's not strictly true, because they're only playing in one sort of time, in I don't know what normal time, not tripleted or over 5. All of that. It's hard to explain. Essentially, it's polymetric, not polyrhythmic. This
right,
one.
Okay.
For a change, compared to their latest 2 albums, Obzen and Coloss, they are both polyrhythmic, and then you hear that sort of cyclic sound that you're saying is not present.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with that, because it's true. You definitely can. They're putting clear cuts in between different riffs and sections, which haven't been around for a while in their recording. So yeah.
Right. Okay.
You're right with that. And the reason why I think it doesn't sound like, or it sounds slightly different to modern Meshuggah is because it was recorded live, and also they're taking their roots back to their 1998 album Chaosphere.
Right.
I would call this their second best album so far. Who knows about this one? And that was very thrash based and very quick, up tempo. Lots going on, lots changing. More, as I was saying, clear cuts between riffs, and I think they kind of reinvented that in a sense and have applied it to their modern approach.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's how they're making their newer sound, and that's how they're adapting old and new together.
I did like the instrumental section at the end. A lot more than the rest of the track, which it felt like
Same.
more of the sort of the atmospheric style of Meshuggah stuff that I'd heard previously.
Yeah.
It was weird, because the link you sent me was to a lyric video, and I'd never really paid attention to the lyrics in their music before, and I was surprised how sort of cliche metal they were. It was a little jarring. It was a little off-putting.
These ones are, yeah, they kind of are. This one's about Thomas said it's loosely about an alien race coming to destroy the humans, obviously with lots of imagery, but that's what it's kind of based on.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are, some of them aren't. It kind of depends what album you're listening to.
Fair enough.
So, but yeah, at the ending, yeah, like you said, I keep replaying that. There's just it's a really good ending to a song. But can you call it thematic? I don't know how you describe
I don't know.
it.
I found it to be like super atmospheric,
It really was. Yeah.
kind of ambient.
Yeah, and just the way Jens, the vocalist, or I guess Jens in Swedish, his little just scream, just anguish, just it's not words, it's just pure noise he makes at the end over that sort of atmospheric part.
He felt like more part of the ensemble.
Exactly.
Was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really good. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's Born in Dissonance, the Violent Sleep of Reason. I'm still not being able to sleep because I'm so excited about this.
right. Okay.
So yeah,
I guess we'll move on to my pick. I mean, this is a piece that is quite important to me. Not new bleeding edge kind of thing, but this was a track that was released in 1998 in an album by the Michael Brecker Quartet. The album's called Two Blocks from the Edge, and this piece is called Delta City Blues. Now, Michael Brecker is probably my favorite saxophonist, one of my favorite musicians ever. And
he's very talented. Very talented.
He's one of the most technically gifted saxophonists of all time.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I don't usually go for that kind of thing. My instinct isn't necessarily to go for technically gifted musicians, but for people who are doing things that are different and interesting. And Michael Brecker wasn't necessarily doing things that were hugely different. But he had a way of taking something that was relatively ordinary, run-of-the-mill, and making it 100 times more engaging just because of how brilliant a saxophonist he was.
Yeah.
I find it to be a particularly inspiring person just because of like how much he persevered. He had a whole load of health issues. Towards the end of his career, he blew out the muscles in his neck because of the force he was putting through his instrument.
That's crazy.
And he had to wear a neck brace for quite a few performances, which is nuts.
It's amazing he's still performing with that injury.
I mean, he was still performing through pretty much all of his health issues. He died quite young in 2007 from complications from leukemia. But he was playing live shows up until 6 months before he died, and he'd been diagnosed a few years previously. The guy was just an incredible person, incredible musician.
Yeah.
And I want to play you guys this piece because I think it's an example of what he can do with something that the rest of us would see as fairly standard. So without further ado, this is Delta City Blues by the Michael Brecker Quartet. So yeah, that was Delta City Blues. Nathan, I kind of want to know what you think of this one.
Well, I was quite interested with it. It starts off with a good minute of just Michael, playing the sax and playing it very, very well indeed. But what I love is how seamlessly the rest of the instruments came in, and suddenly, the harmonies that were going on, the sort of melodic direction he's taking it in was really quite apparent to me. How seamlessly it all came together.
I think with what makes this piece so brilliant is that he actually makes the blues interesting. Like the blues is one of the most, I mean, at least to me, one of the most sort of boring like forms of music that you can think of. It's fairly sort of standard chord sequence that repeats over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And like obviously there's some reharmonization here that makes it a little bit more interesting, but I think what carries it is just his playing the whole way through. It's just constant. There's no let up. I don't think there's a point in the piece where he's not playing.
No.
It's nuts the way that he can, like, as you said at the beginning, he's carrying it by himself. There's no backing, and sort of the constant, just sort of relentless playing kind of makes his saxophone playing like a rhythm instrument, which is bizarre but brilliant.
I get that, the kind of instrumentation side of texture and the way it brings it in as a rhythmic instrument and making it more of a saxophone you just hear playing sort of a few lines, a couple of solos here and there, but you never see it as, or at least in my view of it, I guess it's a very different view to you, but to hear it, playing throughout the song the whole way, not stopping, as you said, is quite different to me, at least, and I found that really interesting.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, just purely just his playing is what sells this track for me. I mean, there's a whole lot of music that he's written that's more interesting, and I would encourage anyone listening to just go and back and listen to his discography, and just find the things that he's written that are particularly fantastic. A lot of collaborations he did with Pat Metheny and Chick Corea were incredible. But I think this song just showcases his raw ability as a saxophonist. I really think that, since he died, there hasn't been a saxophonist that, has surpassed him. There are people who are sort of carrying on his sort of mantra and his approach to playing.
Yeah.
People like Bob Reynolds and Joshua Redman, and then people who are sort of,
I could think of one beginning with an A and ending in Anthony Braxton.
Yes, this is my dad is a big fan of a free improvising saxophonist called Anthony Braxton. I'm not. It's a little, as much as I love experimental music, it's a bit out there for me. It's just very hard to wrap one's head around. And then there's people like Kamasi Washington, who's relatively new on the scene, who's not necessarily as good a player. I don't think any of these guys will ever be as good a player as Michael Brecker, but he's certainly sort of embodying his his passion for the genre, and I think people like Kamasi Washington are kind of reviving it, which is fantastic. I'm going to recommend that if you ever get the chance, go see Kamasi Washington live. I saw him recently at the Albert Hall. It was fantastic. Just do it if you got the chance, if you got the money.
Yeah.
Go see Kamasi Washington. So yeah, that was Michael Brecker. That was Delta City Blues, and of course, Born in Dissonance by Meshuggah. Make sure you check the album out when it comes out on the 7th of October.
Just in case you didn't know.
Just in case you didn't know already. So I think we're going to move on to this week's main topic, which is something that I have titled The Transition to Experimentation.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. This topic stumped me for a bit, but it is an interesting one. And I think it's... Should I explain it? Should I give it a go?
Yeah.
Yeah, and as what you said to me, in my eyes, it's more finding a point with an artist, finding the point in their career where they made the change or went into the realm of adding to their music from a conventional sense to an experimental sense, and doing something new that hasn't been done before, and how the artist approached that, because obviously they would be doing it for the first time.
Yeah, no, ever since you approached me with the sort of pitch for this podcast, this has been something I wanted to talk about purely so that I could talk about the song that I brought with me today.
Yes.
But I think we'll start with yours.
Sure. So the song I have chosen is a song called Ghost on the album Ghost by a very, very talented drummer called Anup Sastry. Now this music again is in my genre of gent. But what's interesting is he's composed all this music, written it, recorded, all on his own, and he's a drummer. And he started off his career playing in a few bands, and he still has and still is to the day, playing and performing live. But he wanted to create more music, and being a rhythmical player, of the drums, I would imagine it would have been quite hard, composing for guitars and adding melodies and harmonies if you hadn't been used to playing them. And he said, this is no challenge for me. He couldn't play the guitar. I think he could only play the drums, but he said, I'm still going to write out an album of music. And he's composed more over time, but, this is the first one he made. It wasn't, a 1 track or 2 tracks. He made a full album of music. And of course he had live recorded drums, which are incredible. He's extremely talented and a rhythmic genius for what he does. But how he approached the guitars was very different. And he bought himself, it must have been a 7-string guitar. Or maybe, I don't know if he actually bought it or found samples online, but either way, is he'd find it, or he'd record the sound of one note or find a sample online of the guitar, and then he'd copy and paste it into his audio workstation and literally basically map it out like a MIDI file, so like you'd write music in Sibelius or something, but using live samples to make the sound. So the guitars sound amazing because they're used with live samples, but nobody's actually played them because they're all one note being plucked individually. Right. And that's really interesting.
Mm.
And what gets really interesting is the fact that because he doesn't play guitar, he doesn't know, or I'm sure he definitely does, but he wasn't limited by what you can and can't play conventionally on a guitar. So if you're to tab out his music, you can't actually play it very well. I mean, people have attempted to, but because it's so all different notes in different places, because he wasn't limited by what a guitarist is thinking, that's too much of a stretch, I can't skip between those strings that quickly, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't, that was no problem for him. So the tab is really interesting because it's almost unplayable by humans.
Mm. So that's interesting, because my gut reaction to that is, oh my God, that's horrific. Why would you write music for guitar that a guitarist couldn't play?
Yeah.
But I guess that's not really the point.
No.
I'm wondering though, does Anup Sastry, does he do much live music? And in that case, how would this kind of thing work in a live context?
Well, sadly, he doesn't play on any of his solo project music live. He only plays with other bands live, and obviously they are conventional in the way they do things. So sadly, you can't really hear any of this live. So
that's a shame.
It's a massive shame. I would have definitely seen it by now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. God. So should we give it a listen then?
Yeah.
So this is Ghost by Anup Sastry. So that was Ghost. Yeah, I was quite surprised by this when you told me it was by a drummer, entirely written by a drummer. I was surprised, and in the gent style, I was really surprised at how tonal it was.
Yeah,
particularly the intro, which is extraordinarily melodic, and quite beautiful as well, very held back. You get a lot of drummer-led ensembles, which tend to be very focused on the drumming, and not at all sort of like, harmonically literate. But this felt quite different, and it seems that this guy's really taken his sort of ego out of the equation. Is not just sort of trying to show off how brilliant his drumming skills are, which is quite nice.
It is humble in that sense. I do agree with that. I think with gent and modern gent, I will say, yeah, lots of it is tonal and lots of it is quite conventional in harmony, and that's just how the genre sort of evolved. You listen to older sort of true gent Meshuggah, and it's not, you wouldn't call it tonal at all. And I think that's just the way, people have put their own spin on it. Bands, I think the main reason for this, and I'm not going to sound like I'm being mean to these guys, but the band Periphery, who are known widely in the Gen community possibly to be one of the biggest, side by side Meshuggah, they sort of took up, or the guitarist Misha Mansour took up the tone and the rhythm of Gent and applied it to his sort of modern day harmony and melodic opinion, and therefore made the genre a bit more tonal. Now, whether or not you agree with that, it's here nor there, but I'm saying what it is, Anup Sastry, I guess he likes that. So it is interesting, and you're right, it does have the sort of piano or synth intro, and that is, it is nice to have it, without the drums and, his wider appreciation of music as a whole rather than just the drums.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting you should mention sort of the relationship between Periphery and Meshuggah and how one sort of took the genre and kind of warped it a little.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of the case with the band that I wanted to talk about today, which is Radiohead. And I mean, like, this isn't really related to the piece I want to talk about, but I mean, or I guess it kind of is.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I guess this is our podcast. We can do what we want.
Yeah.
But that kind of relationship, you could kind of draw a parallel between Radiohead and Muse. In that sort of Radiohead started something with the music they were making towards the end of the 90s with albums like The Bend and OK Computer, which was sort of pretty standard art rock, but with a few sort of bizarre harmonic twists.
Yeah.
And sort of Muse took that and kind of turned it into this sort of gross arena rock. I'm really sorry if you like Muse. I hate them. I hate them so much. But I think that the reason for that is that actually because of the track and the album of Radiohead's I want to talk about today, in that sort of in the year 2000 when Radiohead came out with their album Kid A, they changed and Muse didn't. And so sort of Muse took what Radiohead was doing in the late 90s and just kept refining that until they reached sort of peak popularity.
Yeah.
Whilst in the background, Radiohead's doing all of these crazy experimental, innovative things.
Definitely.
Because, Kid A was Radiohead's first properly experimental record. Before that, they were doing things that were a little bit different from everybody else, but, not different enough to call them experimental.
Yeah.
I mean,
different enough to be played slightly later at night on the radio.
Yeah.
Not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. They were a pretty unremarkable band. They had your regular old instrumentation, and they were putting some solid work out in the late 90s. But I mean, let's be honest, their first album was trash. Don't listen to Pablo Honey if you can avoid it. It's pretty awful. But yeah, Kid A kind of changed that. And the track that I want to play for you is the title track from that record, and you can hear immediately how much of an enormous left shift they made with this record. So yeah, here is Kid A. Yeah, so that was Kid A. Now I know, Nathan, you're not a huge Radiohead fan, but
No.
I'm wondering what your impressions are of this track.
I was actually really, really intrigued by this, and possibly more contextually than audibly.
Right.
But it was very interesting. I read a lot about it, actually. I will comment on the sound first, and it is very different from their other stuff. And watching them play it live, if you could ignore how many drugs they've taken, because they look mad.
Tom York is not the kind of guy that ever looks sober.
No, but they're all sitting. There's a guy on drums, a guy on bass. He's there, with his microphone and his keyboard, and then the two guitarists are there with like synth pads and MIDI pads and pedals,
Yeah.
and no proper instrument, but just altering the sounds that are being heard and sort of splicing different bits here and there. And it's really interesting how much of a change that is.
Yeah.
To all of them.
It's really interesting you should pick up on that, because that was the main thing for me, that they sort of ditched that guitar rock formula and they picked up synths and keyboards, and they really warped the hell out of Tom York's vocals to the point where like some critics were really upset about this. And I picked out a quote from a magazine called Resonance, and they wrote the harshest review of this album, and it's so it's so savage. It's actually quite funny. The quote that you pick up on is that it's a record that might have been amazing if only the band had bothered to write some actual songs.
Wow.
Like,
that's just, I just feel like looking at that person for 5 minutes, then just saying to them, concept. And see if they react to that word.
Yeah.
Because I feel that's not in their vocabulary.
It's quite interesting when I don't know whether you were I think you might have been, when we at school we had been involved in an instrumental ensemble of sort of Eastern European folk music, and we were rehearsing for a concert that school was putting on. And this little bugger, this little arsehole from a few years below us walks into the hall while we're rehearsing, and then when we finish, he goes, I mean, that's all very well and good, but it's just notes, isn't it?
That's literally me when someone plays Meshuggah. I'm like, yeah, it's all just numbers, though, really.
it was just this really awful, like, blind, ignorant comment. And you think you weren't listening then.
Exactly.
You were just ignoring everything that was going on. And like, the music we were playing is not that complicated, but it's more than just notes.
Yeah, exactly.
And you think,
it's a very ignorant thing to say.
People are what's wrong with music, not music. People are what's wrong with music. Breakdown over.
Yeah. But this was a really interesting musical revelation for them, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it was bizarre because nobody had really heard anything like this before from them. It was kind of amazing that like the band's fans actually stuck with them.
Yeah.
And they're like hardcore like fanatics, and particularly about this record, and it's really surprising because these are people who are listening from the beginning and hail a record like OK Computer, which is so different, is one of the best albums of all time. It's bizarre. Really bizarre.
Well, it's dedication in one way, I guess.
Yeah.
It is interesting. Now, can I pick up on my little research about it? I found a little something called Kid 17. Now, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I don't know nearly as much about it as you do. I'm only just aware of it. I found out a little bit about it today, but not really much. So,
now this was a very interesting proposition to me because it's just a musical feature that people have started to overhype and act like it's something else. And I'll get into that. I'll first explain what it is. So, Kid 17 is an idea. I think it came about from an interview of the fact that if you play Kid A on one set of speakers and then you play it again 17 seconds later on another set of speakers, it will, and I say in quotation marks, magically sync up and react with each other, and new harmonies, new rhythms coming together all in time, and react that way as a new piece of music. Now you can listen to it on YouTube, and it sounds fine, but it's slightly it's probably only to the trained musician. You can hear that it's every drum beat sounds a bit like a flam. And the reason for this is because it doesn't sync up perfectly at 17 seconds.
Yeah.
It would be 16 and something, or 17 and something, but it's closest to rounded 17. And how this works is that I don't know what the BPM is of the song, but it could be 4 bars or 8 bars or 16 bars of the music would equal 17 or rounded 17 seconds or close enough to it.
So then if you layer the same music on top of it, but that section of time later,
exactly,
it all just sort of overlaps because the harmonies are fairly repetitive.
Exactly.
And, the rhythmic stuff is fairly repetitive.
And the style of music is almost minimalistic, so everything is meant to work together.
Yeah, it's quite ambient, and yeah, it's quite an unremarkable feature, I guess, particularly of sort of modern art rock and ambient rock and post rock as well. You tend to get a lot of repetition, and this kind of thing, it's almost just sort of like saying, well, let's remix it. It's not all that different.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. People kind of, I guess, in the comments, if you didn't know about it, you would overhype it to think it's some thing that they planned all along from the beginning, that they had in mind. But really, I mean, I'm not knocking it. It's a cool thing, but it could be done for lots of music, and it is just the way it's composed with 8-bar riffs or whatever.
There is quite sort of like a cultish sort of mystery vibe surrounding Radiohead, and it's been like that ever since Kid A, really. That since that album, since they went sort of independent, they've made each album release sort of quite a creepy kind of bizarre event kind of a thing, particularly with their latest record. I don't know whether you heard about this, but I find it all kind of terrifying and also pretty funny. In the run-up to the release of their latest album, A Moonshaped Pool, which is, it's a really good record, but again, quite overhyped. What they did was that they wiped clean all of their social media. There was nothing on any of it, and all of their names were like deleted, and they changed their profile pictures to just sort of like a plain white, image, and then slowly things started appearing in a really sort of creepy, ominous way. Fans started receiving leaflets in the post that just said the words "Burn the Witch" and "We know where you live."
That's spooky.
Which is borderline stalkery. It's pretty creepy. And then they start releasing these sort of creepy images and like sort of stop motion gifs of like sort of a bird, like a stop motion bird in a tree, and then a really creepy one of a woman tied to a tree while cloaked men dance around her with swords.
Right.
And like this is all like sort of like animated puppet kind of thing, so that makes it even creepier. And only then do they release the first single for the album, which is called "Burn the Witch," which is another really creepy song about like government surveillance and like modern day paranoia. But that kind of thing has always surrounded the band, that sort of mystery, which in a recent interview Tom York has said, "Oh, he's done with that now. I'm getting too old for this. We're just gonna release albums like normal human beings now," which I'm kind of glad about, if I'm honest.
Fair enough. That's interesting stuff.
So yeah, I guess that's kind of it. You got any interesting tidbits you want to talk about? Anything that you've come across recently that is of particular interest?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to think about. There's not been much new recently. Again, I've been waiting for October the 7th. But I was very interested in this whole Kid A thing, and it really did open my eyes to Radiohead's just their way of doing things. Because personally, when somebody said the name Radiohead to me, all I would think of was the song "Creep."
Oh god.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't get me
I
started.
think there's some random strumming a few chords on the guitar, and I'd be like, "This is what's wrong with everything." And then I heard this, and I was like, I wouldn't have perceived them to be the same thing. This is so different and so much better in my eyes. So yeah, that was eye-opening for me. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been to a couple of concerts recently. I mentioned the Kamasi Washington concert, which was amazing. but nothing really out of the ordinary, nothing I didn't expect. This is just sort of his touring show, and that he happened to have a string section and a choir, which he's had before. But I a week or so before that, I saw another concert at the Albert Hall. This is the advantages of having a friend with a wealthy family who has a box at the Albert Hall. You get to go and see free concerts, which is amazing. But
just a private box, a cardboard box at that.
literally, like you go. It's really strange because whenever I've been to the Albert Hall with my family, getting tickets there is expensive, so we always end up in the nosebleeds, right at the top, and you can't see anything. You have a better. I don't know if you've ever been to the Albert Hall, but
not recently.
So at the top of the building, the top of the hall, they have these mushrooms which are to like stop too much reverberation and to create sort of the right acoustic setting. But when you're in the nosebleeds, when you're up close, you can see how filthy they are. Like, they're really grimy. No one's ever cleaned them, just because it's difficult to get to them because they're quite high up. And I mentioned this to my friend whose box this is, and he's like, "Oh, I never noticed." And I'm like, "This is the aristocracy. This is bourgeois. This. We must seize the means of production. This is this is high society. This is everything wrong with the world." But
free Royal Albert Hall. I can't even say it.
Yeah. So we went to a prom recently, which was the Quincy Jones prom. I don't know how aware of Quincy Jones's work you are, but he was a quite well-known arranger and composer from the particularly active in the 70s. He wrote a lot of Michael Jackson's music, and he did a lot of arrangements of jazz standards and such things. And so this was a concert in the sort of celebration of him, and they had playing in the music the Metropole Orchestra, who are quite a well-known jazz pop orchestra. They played a lot of people like Snarky Puppy and Chaka Khan, and but they had a bunch of really great guests, including Corey Henry.
Corey Henry,
who I know you're a big fan of. He's the one of the many keyboard players in Snarky Puppy, as well as a pretty unique vocalist called Laura Mvula, who's got 2 records, and they're both fantastic, so give those a listen. As well as one of my favourite new musicians, a guy called Jacob Collier, who's done a lot with multi-tracking and harmonization. He helped design and invent this particular type of synthesizer called the harmonizer, which allows you to, like, it takes like a live recording of your voice and then allows you to harmonize that on the go. So every note that's being produced from the machine is your voice, which is bizarre and ridiculous. But
it's interesting how it works. I watched a video on it.
Yeah, it's
I
crazy.
guess we'll save it for another episode.
Yeah. But the particularly fantastic thing about this concert, there was one moment where they all came out and played Billie Jean. It's really bizarre because you have this orchestra playing all of the backing, and then Corey Henry on one side of the stage and Jacob Collier on the other side of the stage, and they're having sort of like a harmonizer off. And Jacob Collier's playing on his harmonizer and doing all these complicated chords and stuff with his voice. And then you got Corey Henry on the other side of the stage. He's got this sort of pretty janky old vocoder, which is attached to like a Moog. And it's, oh god, it was just bizarre, them going backwards and forwards. And just so the audience were really confused, because it was quite hard to get your head around, the amount of sort of sounds coming out of there. And bizarre for Billie Jean, which is one of the most accessible songs I've ever listened to. Yeah. But making that song complicated and heady was bizarre. I just sort of me and my mate sort of jumping up and down in our seats with excitement. The people around us sort of like looking confused at the stage, with Corey Henry sort of bouncing up and down in his seat because he has more fun than anybody, whatever he's doing. I would say if you get a chance to go and see this, go see it, but you can't, because it was a one-off thing. But I think it might still be on the iPlayer if you live in the UK, BBC iPlayer.
Fine.
Unfortunately, I have no idea when this episode's going to go up, so it may be gone.
Hopefully it
Sorry.
won't be.
So yeah, Nathan, do you want to take us out?
Yes, so thank you very much for listening to My Ears Hurt. And if you enjoyed it, please do follow, like, subscribe to us, and, leave us any comments or any suggestions for a topic you'd like to hear us discuss and give our opinions on future episodes. So you can find me on my SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Nathan-Ruben-4. I'll also put a link to my YouTube channel in the description. There'll be more uploads on that. And you can find Daniel on Twitter at alwaysbewhelmed, and you can find his blog at healthymusicobsession.com. So again, thank you very much and hope you enjoyed it.